Hi everyone, I'm Chong Khee and I'm very excited to have with me today the two lead creatives behind Remotes and Quantum, which is a very haunting and evocative piece. Firstly, calling in from the Philippines, we have John Torres, who is the writer, director, editor, as well as producer for Remote and Quantum. In person with me today is Eleanor Wong, who is the writer of The Quantum of Space, and that is featured in Remotes and Quantum. So maybe just to kick us off, because the title is so interesting, could both of you just talk a little bit about the different valencies and ways in which you're thinking about the title?
It's all John's fault, so I'm going to punt it to John. All I did was propose the initial title, which was The Quantum of Space, and obviously understandable at a very literal level. So really, it was John that then, when we started to collaborate together, John, who sort of saw how it might fit into something larger, which the piece has morphed into, and also John, who is entirely responsible for the title. So it is indeed totally his fault.
Yes.
Guilty as charged, right, John?
Same time, I was yes, but very, very nice. I was really thinking about a placeholder title, which I just put it in the document, and it just felt right. Somehow, in terms of pace, of course, I was thinking any other iterations, but at the same time, when the time came to take on a title, I felt that Elle was feeling okay with it. I was feeling okay with it, so might as well just come and propose this title. It also retains kind of the separate states of being of the separate projects, just as we came to this virtual space and met together. So X is kind of the thing that separates, but also a meeting point of these two separate projects that are now being morphed and will be seen in SIFA for May. So yeah, it just feels right.
Yeah,
No secret.
I think I really love this idea of X as a meeting point, but also in treasure maps, right? The X as the point where the treasure is to be found. And yet at the same time also, when it looks very simple and deceptive on the page as a straightforward X, and yet for people to read it out, we were just talking about this, right? Is it remotes and quantum, or is it remotes times quantum, or remotes, all these different interpretations. And I think that actually really feels resonant with the work, right? That it can be read in all these different ways. And it is precisely this kind of shifting quality that is crucial to the spirit and the essence of the production. But, John, you were talking about how there are these two different projects that exist on itself. And I was wondering if both of you could talk a little bit more about what are these two separate projects, right? The synopsis of the piece does talk about the project itself as being a marriage of, John, your piece, The Remotes, and then Eleanor, your text itself, the Quantum of Space. Maybe, Eleanor, could you share a little bit more about where that text came from?
So I guess in terms of time,
What is time?
Remote time. In terms of time, on this project, I was probably the first to be brought in by Natalie, and at the start, like so many of these wonderful projects that have come together in SIFA 2022 under Natalie's canny matchmaking. Initially, I think my limited imagination only had what was going to be, I think, a theatrical piece that alternated between perhaps some narrative bits interspersed with some slightly more poetic pieces. And that was how it was supposed to be, sort of, boringly poem poem sketch, poem sketch, poem sketch, poem sketch, poem sketch. With that sort of structure, like I said, with my limited imagination, right? But I think Nat was smart enough to see that I needed a partner in it, and was super, super brilliant to bring in John, who has just been a wonderful, wonderful collaborator. And I think at the point when John then came in, I had written a few of the poetic pieces and had lazily left the narrative pieces in outline or just with my idea of what might fill them in. And thankfully, I think John has decided not to follow any one of those and kind of to go with his own idea of which parts of quantum to put into the space that is now remote quantum.
Super nice. I like how you talk, Al, about your own project and idea where you were. You say boringly, but it's so compelling for me. Grateful to be here and to be matched with you, Al. So to talk about my own project, The Remotes, came about at a time when I was trying to document spaces in the Philippines, film spaces in the Philippines, trying to make work at the same time, not to miss a lot of time at home, because at home we had our 4-month-old daughter, and because we were all in this rhythm, in this cycle of 3 hours in a day, breastfeeding cycle, and coming in to help and be there. I wanted to still make work, but at the same time not to miss too much time at home. So I had this window of just one cycle of 3 hours in a day to come out of the house at a time of Duterte, which is this horrible time from 2016, 2017. The war on drugs in the Philippines was very violent, and that meant I was coming out of the house and to face this kind of atmosphere in the Philippines. I had to also make work. I had to continue being a filmmaker. So I was trying to hack the system and try to just go inside the film sets of these storytellers, those who have the resources to make their own productions, but at the same time come into their productions and document the spaces, the peripheral spaces, so that I could capture enough moments of film and cinema in terms of what is a cinematic scene, and thread together through my visits my own imagined fictional film out of these visits. Trying to distill themes from these storytellers, trying to react to these violent times. At the same time, also prove to our daughter that, hey, I didn't miss too much. I was still able to make film while being with you. So it was really about post-processing these windows in a day and trying to see how I could tenderly tell of the times to our daughter who was trying to also see and maybe understand what was happening. So this was in 2017. I made short 13-minute work out of it and proved that to myself more so that I could stand by a point and recontextualize, repurpose scenes so that I could still tell the story of our home. But then the pandemic happened and everything was arrested. My mother passed away during the first wave in the Philippines. Ever since we've had the longest lockdown in the world, or kind of the top 3. So the although things are opening up here, we are still very much constrained to leaving to staying in the house, if not to leave this space of safety, and that's how it is still. the feeling is. And when I got the call from Nat, I was already trying to see how I could adapt and find a new space for this work to continue on. The pandemic has arrested, but also provided a nice platform for me to a virtual platform for me to especially collaborate with a brilliant artist. We're so different from each other, but we feel like we share so much without even having to, in film parlance, having to have the backstory established, without having to reveal of motivations and hindrances to all these things, a goal, which we haven't even, reconciled apart from this one presentation that's going to happen in late May. So, yeah, that's how I did it.
Yeah, thanks for that. There were so many things that I want to pick up on, but I, at this point, really want to acknowledge how great it is that we are able to, in a way, share space, even if it's in this very hybrid and strange way. And of course, technical difficulties are always going to be part and parcel of these kinds of hybrid experiences. And yet it's amazing what can happen despite of that. One thing that I'm feeling very strongly from both John and Eleanor, your work often takes your own personal experiences and your personal reflections about the world around you into your art making. And I hear that so clearly from what, John, you were talking about in the way you're approaching the making of the remotes, right? That you're trying to understand what is possible within your day-to-day life, within the rhythms of your life at that point in time, and also then what you're thinking about in terms of society at that point in time. And I'm thinking now then for remotes and quantum, how did the pandemic shape or shift the way in which you think about your own practice and therefore also this project that has emerged from these pandemic times? Maybe Eleanor?
Well, I mean, I am primarily a writer, and one of the things that I've always been very aware of throughout my time in theatre is that I literally don't see anything, right? I hear a lot more than I see, and I'm dreadful at imagining what's going to actually take place on stage, which I think makes me actually quite a good writer, because it means I'm always acutely aware of the fact that I can't do this on my own. I need the director, the person who sees, the actors who embody, everyone around me who reads what are just words and then somehow turns them into this experience that others can then be immersed in, and which I would not have been able to create with just my words. So in a strange sort of way, the pandemic changed nothing for me. My part of the process has always been, I suppose, inside here, and then it comes out in the words, right? But I think to put a different complexion on it, the hubris of this piece, in a way, was that when Nat sat me down, and I think she won't mind if I share this, the hubris was, she said, I need you to write the COVID piece from the perspective of distance, right? I mean, like, the hubris and the conceit was that by the time we sat down to stage this, it would all be done. We'd be looking back on it with that wisdom and that, that resolution that comes from the fact that it was now 2 years ago, and indeed, the conceit of it was that when I first wrote it, it was self-contained like that, right? And in fact, one of the pieces that is sort of about this couple, and I don't think it will ever come out, so I can talk about it, right? They were supposed to sort of be about this couple who goes through the pandemic in a year, starting in month 1, then month 2, then month 3, and it sort of catches them at lunchtime as first. The pandemic first forces them to actually have lunch together, and then brings them closer, I suppose, to lunch. But then as the pandemic goes along, in my mind, when I wrote it, you then come to a point where you get in each other's hair, the pandemic tears them apart, and then it sort of all, it all comes full circle. And the conceit was to be able to actually think that piece would work like that. And of course, now that snake has eaten its tail, right? I mean, we've gone in and out of that particular cycle. And there's a piece that was actually the last piece that I wrote, and maybe at some point I'll speak it out, because I think John wants to hear me actually say it. But that piece was written in near the end of last year, in 2021, and it kind of looks back on that conceit, right, of that original concept, and it acknowledges that we're all still in the middle of it. We're all still trying to make sense of it, right? So, COVID is very much a part of this piece, even though I think we'll look through it and there will be no direct references. Yeah.
I think there are so many references to COVID.
Whatever. Maybe the references will be glancing, or they'll be implied and inferred, or they'll be provided by the lived experiences of those who watch it. Yeah.
I'm suddenly realizing now why I feel like COVID comes through very strongly, and this is very interesting because, Eleanor, you were talking about that we're having a chat before this conversation, right? And you said you have not looked at any of the materials.
Yeah, so I don't know what it's going to be like.
Yeah, and I'm keeping it a secret to her.
Yes, and thank you for that, John. I love you for that.
Yes.
Yes, so okay,
yes.
I will not spoil any part of it for Eleanor. But for John, how you spoke a little bit about it already in terms of some of your thoughts about the pandemic, but could you share more about how the pandemic has in turn influenced your practice, and then also how that translates into the way that you've approached remotes and quantum?
Yes. So during the first weeks of lockdown, it was a deep appreciation, or a deep perception of our own space, our roots. We heard total silence because we needed to hear total silence as well for a time. But we also heard ambulances, sirens, and passing by. So this sound was quite something of an experience for me, knowing also that because I cannot be somewhere else, somehow sound, voices, or some things that have traveled far and wide for every one of us, and have kind of anchored us to feel that we're still there in our own spaces and still surviving the times. When my mother was in her last few days in the hospital, I was actually trying to document my own voice and see how this can travel to her, maybe, because even though it's not loud enough, maybe it can still carry on, and the waves will somehow decide to come to her in her own in their own way. I felt sound was free. I felt the voice was something that we could explore. I was wishing that to have a conversation, a kind of a goodbye still to my mother in her last few moments, and even after she died, I was thinking maybe I needed to have this conversation, and voice was something that I felt was an integral part. I wanted to hear her voice in some sort of way, and through film, I could document kind of this feeling or yearning for a voice. And so when I was so the pandemic has really attached me to this hope for voice to travel across. At the same time, apart from voice, the ritual of every day that I had to um, constrain myself so that I could focus on a certain space, a certain frequency within me to own, so that I could travel to. So ritual is very very big part. Here, being us being predominantly Catholic, we had a recurring daily morning mass that we could tune into, which I began to really obsess about and memorize through. And that was my own frequency that I could feel, that I could inhabit, so that I could travel freely and, and finally have this yearning. So a belief in voice, a belief in dreams that could travel and that we could meet there. And so making this film and meeting and pre-producing and developing this in a virtual way, somehow my voice here has carried on to else ears in that sense, has made it possible. And that is kind of how I'm being enriched, and how I'm latching on even more and more into. And for the collaboration and the sessions and the meetings, these are really meeting of two people, and getting to know each other. Because in the end, as I was in this headspace, film for me was nothing. Film for me, I ceased to be a filmmaker. I just wanted to survive, and I just wanted to communicate and hear, and make it possible to also speak, to have this conversation. So in that sense, those collaborations were more really about, hey, El, how are you? What are your thoughts? I don't have any questions. What do you think? you know, what can you see, even, right? And what has happened, or what do you plan to do? Not in those terms, but in a very, very tender, I think, way of revealing ourselves to each other. So collaboration in this sense was very, very organic, but at the same time, others would say very free flowing and very kind of very poetic, and a certain language that when we dream, we accept this language as such, a very, very nice meeting of the minds of the soul of two people. And what you will see will be kind of this product of these encounters. So, but I guess now that Elle hasn't seen the work, and Nat has seen a little bit of it. Not so much into narratives as I am into tone, into rhythm, as into a certain plot or story, especially in film. The magic for me is in these other frequencies.
And I think you can see like how different we are, even in how we think about art or how we approach all of this. And so I think it's a miracle, but a very nice miracle that well, I mean, I'm as curious as anyone else to see how this will all come together. But I think what is the miracle is that there's almost is there complete trust, John? I'm not even it's not even bothering me. There's complete trust. Yeah.
So grateful. Oh yeah, and I felt that all throughout, and so I'm so free to just. And as much as she so Elle has given me all the space, it makes me more. I want to be with her, and I want to say hello to her at even you know odd times. No, you could say that unmotivated. Things. Maybe. Even I will try to make up an excuse to meet just to be with each other, just maybe to have this is kind of confusing me, Elle, and maybe we could talk about it. And I have that in the draft, but once we are together, she knows maybe that it's just an excuse.
No, but then after that, I will write him like these summaries, and I say, okay,
exactly.
Here are the 5 points we talked about, right? So, and all that. And then, but I don't know. I mean, maybe, I suspect none of that was the point, right? But sometimes I'll do that, and then I'll send him these little notes. I'll say, okay, you wanted to know what was happening in Singapore during this part in the pandemic. So, okay, here are the 5 links, and this is, this one speaks to this, and that one speaks to that. And if you're thinking of this, maybe you want to look at these 3 or 4 or 5 articles, and well, I have no clue. I have no clue what will come out of any of that. But that is the whole point. That has been the whole point of this of this time together.
Yeah, exactly. So Elle has been so super generous, supplying me with all the text about the poems, about the context, about things that I appreciate to know. But at the same time, I'm lost in those things. Lost in the sense that I want to be in the middle of all these things and imagine, and not be pressured to put all these things in a form of a linear story or in certain parts of the installation or the performance. It was super nice, and as much as I know that I know so much more about Elle and about the poems and about Singapore, there is no real pressure to put these as in film establishing scenes for us, and it's so super nice. I try to plant all these things in a sort of way that we could understand or we could feel somehow, not through stories or plot, maybe just sound of things even, and it could be frustrating for other people wanting to find story, but I hope that even from the film, that language is established, that it is more about this dream landscape that we could transcend, that we could cross over into and understand, driven by voice that commands, or voice that you hear, a voice that you long to hear and listen to and talk to.
I think what I'm really enjoying so much and really luxuriating in is this easy kind of communication that's happening between the both of you, and the very deep kind of tenderness and love that you have for each other, right? Which is an incredible thing to have for any kind of collaborator, much less 2 people who have only met quite recently, and that's really remarkable to witness.
It is quite remarkable. We even talk about really practical things that could help me. So I don't know if, of course, we need not reveal all those details, but in a very, very real sense, she has helped me in so many other ways, not really just strictly as an artist, but in her other work, in her other aspects in her life. She has this big heart to reach out every time, and even actually perceive through voice what she sees from the screen, which is for me quite remarkable. She's been super generous through all of it, and it's quite funny how she's already
And it's a strange, and I
help
hope
me
I'm
in
not,
other ways.
I'm not going to like throw a wet blanket over it. But I think John, you and I have even talked about it, right? It could be that we will love each other for this collaboration, and then actually never meet again, right? And in a way, it will be fine. It will be fine. It's not. I'm not sure. We may work together again, but maybe we never will, right? And but it's a strange sort of relationship where I think the very first meeting already, we sort of just had this really easy way of being with each other, even though we did not know each other at all that very first meeting, and. It's progressed somewhat, but in a way, not that much. I mean, it's always sort of just been there, and then at some point, maybe it won't be. And it's fine. So I think that's a kind of an unusual. I mean, we think sometimes of the classic sort of collaborators in art, right, John? I mean, like the writer-director pair who always write together and understand each other, or the musician, the composer, and the lyricist who come together, and they always sort of stay together because they have that connection and they want to keep making the work together. But this has been an interesting collaboration on which I think, in a way, the work is us, we are the work, and then and then it's sort of it's contained there. Does that make sense to you, John?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, yes, go
No,
on.
I was just going to say, and in a way, I think it does come out very strongly in a piece as well, as an audience, without spoiling it. I felt very strongly this sense of chance encounters, of fleeting kinds of moments, and that seems to capture this rhythm that is happening between the both of you, right? That don't necessarily have to sustain in time, but yet has very deep kind of ripples beyond that fleeting encounter. And this makes me wonder then, in terms of the thematics of the piece, there's a huge focus on this idea of the state of possession, right? Both as a verb and as a noun. And I was wondering if, John, that is something you could talk about.
Yeah, definitely. So possessing the body, the Duterte government has introduced to us that there is a possibility that they can control our bodies. Our bodies can be snatched away. That there is a knock on our door that we should surrender freely and disappear into the night and not be seen again. And so the state possessing our bodies, I couldn't process things. I couldn't process. This was such a new thing for us. I grew up at a time when we had our new democracy, when we ousted a dictator, and we were so free, and nobody could possess us. Nobody could tell us that we couldn't do things. And through the years, issues of surveillance and other things that have crept up, a rewriting of all the rules of our history as well. And suddenly, there is a knock on their door that can take us away. I didn't know how to deal with this. And the only other thing that I could think about was the belief that spirits could also possess us, that other people could possess our bodies so that we could say different things or assume different roles or be in another state. That's how I was, I tried to describe how this voice that says, I can control you, can actually control me. And so when I was making the film, I was also trying to compare how a tender voice, a voice that I want to hear, a presence of this motherly voice of my mother, that has commanded me also to things for the family, but also a tender voice, could be likened to somehow this other voice of the state that is so violent, that could also snatch us into places. So I wanted to just explore those themes into the work and see where it could take me. When I was talking to some friends in Singapore, and they share their own experiences of COVID. They also talked about spaces of possessions, materials, and I thought it was interesting to explore because I somehow am transformed, or that the work will be set in this other country, full of possessions. I wanted to see how these two ideas could juxtapose against each other. So that was really the impulse for me.
Yeah, and I mean, when you say the snatching, I'm immediately thinking about the science fiction film like The Return of the
Body Snatcher.
Right, and
Yes.
and all these kind of dystopian science fiction films, or just science fiction genre in itself, that in today's world it's suddenly not so unrealistic or not so implausible, right? If we think about the rise in surveillance, the kind of face recognition, bio-tracking technology, like all these things have really accelerated during the pandemic.
Exactly.
And yeah, I was just curious, for Eleanor, as you were, were any of these themes present for you initially in the writing or not so much?
I think not so much. For me, the theme that I tried to explore in most of my pieces is the idea of space, and maybe it is the flip side, right, of possession, but sort of the idea of distance and how close can you come and how far can you stay. Yeah.
Yeah, and that distance is also, I think, apparent as a kind of dark humor across, the text and also in the film, right? It feels like there is that even as we are thinking about all these fairly heavy, fairly intense ideas, that there is also a little bit of levity, albeit in that kind of dark humor. And I think that has also come through in previous works of yours. Could you talk about humor as a device that you use in your work?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think I'm out of my depth here because I'm the one who, my day job is I'm just a legally trained person who writes sometimes. So I'm not sure. I'm quite as intentioned as that in any of my writing. I think I'm just a person who I find that I can be direct, and I think perhaps in some of the other parts of my life, I need to be clear and direct, and but when it comes to writing, I find that very often it is in that painful laugh where the moment of knowing comes together, right? I mean, it's painful enough that you laugh about it, right? And that laughing, maybe it leavens the moment slightly, but it also, I think, brings it home.
Yes. Yeah. I think that kind of knowing laugh is a deeply interesting one, where it's, in Mandarin we have this expression 苦笑, like the bitter smile, bitter laugh, and I think there is definitely that feeling of it in Remotes and Quantum. John, what about you as a filmmaker? How do you work with humor or dark humor?
Oh wow! I the only thing that I can think of now is when I'm always trying to get out of trouble when it comes to the police, trying to get something from me. The only thing that I could do is to try to make them laugh, and then I've escaped them. This is how I feel that, you know, my own way of slipping away from kind of danger, and this is how I feel that there is kind of an apprehension or a trap. And the only way, if I could just make you laugh in a different way, because that would mean that, okay, we shared this moment of laughter between us. I could get away. This is, it's really something that that I am now realizing about the work. Especially when we try to cope, and when we still carry this smile through 9 times of great tragedy. We carry this smile, which is super sad if you come to think about it. I guess I carry that in my works, that I planned all these things so that I could share these moments of laughter with you, but also I could slip away, and so that I could I could be elusive in that sense, you know, so that you could you don't have to ask me anymore. You don't have to come chase after me after this. Yeah.
Wow, thank you for that. That was really powerful. I'm thinking so much about laughter as a kind of self-defense mechanism, laughter as a way of rupturing things so that other kinds of possibilities can slip through, right? I think about the carnival, right?
Like it makes
that
you
one day of and just where other possibilities then can be imagined, and through the imagination of these other possibilities, then maybe the cracks of reality would start to, you know, ripple and unfold and transform into something else altogether. And, you know, the way both of you talk is always so poetic. Like, I'm really just enjoying this conversation that we're having, and of course having seen your previous works as well. How do you approach this idea of the poetry or the poetics of language, right, in the way you're writing, that both of you have contributed writing to this particular production? Maybe, Eleanor, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure
It just flows naturally.
understood the question. I mean, how do you approach? How do you
think about, I guess, the rhythm or the tone, you know, in Y? Like, your pieces have a very specific kind of rhythm to it. And for this piece as well, when I listen to your poems, there is a very specific kind of cadence and register that you're playing with, the idea of voices, right, that John was talking about. Like, you play with voice in the way you write as well. It sounds like it just emerges naturally for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I do. I don't. Okay, so I mean, maybe the only thing I can say is that, like I said earlier, right? I really don't see very well. I really don't. And my partner, who is also, who is a poet, who's the real poet in the family, you know, she sees her work is so evocative in terms of the images that she draws, right? And we once sat down and we talked to each other, and I mean, she's describing, I mean, we've both been at the same, we're talking about the same thing, right? Or the same event. And she describes it almost to the greatest of detail, like a film, John, right? I mean, she retains the film of it, right? And I'm kind of like, okay, I don't see anything at all, but I know that we were at a cafe, so let me just pull up my concept of the table, okay? So I'll just like pull generic table out and put it there, okay? And then, of course, I have your picture. Your picture is very vivid in my mind, so I'll pull you out and I'll put you in a generic chair, and I'll put myself across from you in another generic chair. And I recall that the conversation was about this concept or that concept. And so, let me just recreate what it might be. And none of the memory, first of all, none of the memory is real. It's all been recreated in my mind. None of the memory is visual, because it was all sort of these, I had the tag, right, of, event, serious talk, topic, the persons involved, and location. And then I just had like generic icons of these things in my brain that I pulled out and sort of put there. And so I guess maybe hearing voices in my head is the closest I ever come to thinking. And maybe that's also why when I write, I know for John it's less about narratives, but very often the pieces that I write, there are people talking, In fact, I recall my very first piece, someone sort of said to me, "El, this should be a radio play. It's going to be dreadful as an actual play, because, like nothing happens, but people just talk." I think Philip Jeyaretnam once said also about mergers and accusations. They're just these people nattering on. It was a very accurate review, I think. Maybe that's just it, right? I'm always talking in my head, and then depending on whether the talking sounds more like a scene or it sounds more like something else, then it might come out as a poem. It might come up as a lecture to my students, or it might come out as a slightly more narrative, performative piece.
Oh, thanks for the insight into your writing. I feel like, okay, this does make sense if I think about your writing, right? That it is, the sculpting of the voices are always very clear. And, even for mergers and accusations, it's so great because you get an immediate sense of their personalities through the writing, and which is perfect for theatre dialogue or for film dialogue, right? Because then we don't necessarily, the directors can be the ones to create that physical world around and just really let the characters live based on the writing that you have penned for them. For John, what is it like for you in terms of thinking about the rhythm and the tone and the poetry? Is that also something that feels like it comes naturally to you, or is it something that you kind of sculpt?
Yes. So for me, it's all very visual. Of course, this is mediated by the camera and the lens that can somehow, up to a certain point, let me travel through spaces. I zoom in to a certain detail, and I'm there up close looking at you. I zoom out, and I'm seeing the landscape, and I'm not there. And so I know this, and it is for a shy. I really grew up very, very shy. I still am now, but especially for a very, very shy child who was always looking at people from afar, I was afforded to, create all these stories, unheard conversations, but connected by bodies and faces, gestures. And I had a secret, that this was something that I could tell myself throughout the day. Apart from that, there's editing, that I could juxtapose an image to another, and without having to ask other people to do things, I could present to you another idea just by um, the other shot that I'm juxtaposing next to it. But aside from that, so this wore on, and I began to explore this juxtaposition of the days. I mainly did video diaries of everyday occurrences, but at the same time, as I also spent my time alone with the camera and with all these moments, I began to see more the rhythm from within the frame that had a certain cadence to it, a certain flow to it, like pipes flowing to one another, so that I feel, oh, there is a moment. Oh, the moment is happening. I'm quite impatient. I want to end this, and maybe the battery is running out, but there is still the moment. So I want this to continue on. And so the moment I feel in terms of movement has passed, I cut. And in the editing room, I have all these moments, but they don't fit each other. But at the same time, I have a feeling that they are meant for each other. They are stitched together, and they want to be stitched together in that sense. Then I am so grounded by the fact that I don't have to control a lot of things. I have to just receive all these things and see all these things happening in front of me. And this is shaped how I let the bigger things control the process and dictate what I could receive and process on my own. So editing in itself is kind of a ritual as well, and a prayer for me, because I take my time and I see that, things are clear really later on, especially, and these are things that I cannot begin to sit and write about. They're enormous details, quite minute sometimes, but things that I cannot even begin to recreate. In our way of making work in film, we have to be efficient. We have to put things first on the script, and then the script is broken down into elements, and then people have to find all these elements from different places. And sometimes the right shade of green is not there, and we have to spend more time to look for that. And I just didn't want to bother with kind of this working or this workflow. Maybe it was more practical for me to survive and to communicate, just having to see all these things unfold before me and try to write things down as I juxtapose those flows or those things that flow into each other very naturally.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's very clear to me that both of you are meant to work together, at this particular point in time of both of your practices, at this particular point in time of where the world is right now. And I'm saying this because it feels like there's such natural chemistry that I'm hearing across what both of you are saying, that your voices really meld together so well, and there is a certain porosity as well to the both of you, a kind of openness, right, to letting things emerge and then finding and listening and then seeing how all these different moments connect together to create something else. It doesn't have to be linear. It doesn't have to make logical sense. I don't think, the work you have created is about like, oh, I need to make sense of, how this happens and then, right. It's really just about trusting in the rhythm of the piece to bring us into another space, perhaps, where we can dream, where we can connect with other kinds of voices, apart from what we normally hear in our day-to-day lives. And yeah, I think with that, I just really, again, want to thank the both of you.
Do you think I have to put like a warning symbol on the program to say those who are expecting an Eleanor Wong play should not attend?
No, I don't think so.
No, because I mean, what you're describing
Yeah.
is just so different, I think, from what most people would think of. And I mean, I myself acknowledge it, right? I mean that I don't think I've done something quite like this before. Sort of write little pieces and share little bits of things, and then sort of just give them to someone else to. As John so beautifully puts it, right? To decide which pieces long to be which other which other pieces in what sequence, and then to stitch them together. I mean, I think that whatever people might describe any of my previous work as, that is not how they would describe it. So yeah. Do you think I need to put that warning sign? Everybody who is watching this now, better manage expectations. Yeah.
I think
Yes.
I think for anyone who is watching this now, it will be very clear what the spirit and the essence of the production is. For people who are not watching this,
well, hard luck to you. You should have been watching this.
yes, you should have been watching this. And also, I think there is also something to be said about the framing of it as really a marriage between you, Eleanor, and John. And I'm so excited for both of you to be able to, meet in Singapore in person and have more of the tender encounters and exchanges that you've been having. Thank you very much.
Yay!